What's up, YouTube? I'm Matt Silva from Vita Workshop, and today I'm talking to you about how to bring a character from concept to completion. So one of the things I think is the biggest challenge in taking a character from concept and creating a real-life version of that all the way to completion is how do you translate that design? Now, typically, you can do this in one of three ways. Maybe you're working on a custom project, on a custom design. Maybe you're translating a character from other media like comic books or movies or just an illustrated series. And maybe the third one, you're doing something that's actually a hybrid of all of them. Maybe it's a little bit of a customization on a character that already exists. For today's video, I'm going to be talking specifically about translating characters from a pre-existing design or doing a custom version of a pre-existing character. All right, core structure, broad view, these are what you really should be thinking about. Boil your character down to its most essential components. When I say that, one of the most easy things to start with is taking a look at what are the points of interest. Now, if you're not aware, a point of interest is an area or an object or an aesthetic choice that draws a viewer's attention. A point of interest is usually just a shape, a color, an object, something to draw the attention of the viewer's eyes. It's done purposefully. When translating a character, I find that there's really usually at least three major points of interest that you cannot get rid of. If you're gonna get rid of them, you'd be very clever about how you get rid of them, but oftentimes you still need to bring something back to replace it. Now, just a quick heads up, this video is all about translating characters. You can use it for cosplay, you can use it for work if you're a professional, but ultimately, like, if you're doing this for fun and you're cosplaying, keep in mind that a lot of the things that I'm talking about are just for literally breaking down characters. At the end of the day, no matter your body size, shape, your height, your stature, your muscular nature, or how thin you are, have fun. Don't take it too seriously. But I did feel it was important to at least mention that this is just more of a thought process breakdown than it is a rules for cosplayers. Another big broad view topic is think about form and function. They usually go together. The form should follow the function. Now, this isn't always true. Sometimes in fantasy design, especially in gaming, things are just crazy. Where you look at comic books, characters are just massively huge in an unattainable way usually. So there is some flexibility here, but overall, really make sure that your form follows your function. Now, as our last broad view topic, make sure that you're considering your actor, model, or even yourself in the equation when it comes to designing and functionality. It's so important that your actor or model can be able to actually perform, walk around, move, operate within this character that you've created. A makeup that's too thick is never going to be able to emote. It's going to be a big rubber mask. A suit of armor that's so big, it looks incredibly impressive, but as soon as they start moving, they wibble wobble and they can't move around much. It becomes comical. How to consider those things in the final product. Let's talk about points of interest that were done well and not so well. First up, let's take a look at Apocalypse from the X-Men movie in 2016. Before I jump in, I just feel like it's important to mention that Legacy Effects handled the costume and the makeup creation for Apocalypse, and the makeup specifically was applied by Brian Sipe and Alexei Dmitriev. Incredible work all around. All of the things that I'm about to say in terms of character translation really have nothing to do with the artisans on the ground who made this incredible work come to life, and more to do with the writing team and likely a lot of executive studio decisions. All right, jumping in, his first point of interest is definitely going to have to be his size. He's big, he's imposing, muscular, and even though he can change shape and size at will, I just think that overall he needs to feel imposing and massive. His second point of interest definitely revolves around his color. It's cool tones, it's blue grays, it's muted purples, and it needs to give us the feeling of a lack of warmth. And finally, his third point has got to be his armor. It's tank-like, and it's very much about being rooted, grounded, and immovable. Now let's look at Apocalypse in the movie. Okay, so first up, we can see that color-wise, they pretty much hit the mark. They're using a cold palette, it's muted, and they're using a lot of the similar colors, and I think it works really, really well. It's giving us that insight into his character as someone who does not care about life or have any compassion for others. Next up, size. I think this is one of the biggest ones. They really, really missed the mark here. He just looks like a normal-sized person in some thick padded armor. And lastly, his armor does not feel like the rooted tank-like armor that we saw in a lot of the illustrated versions, and I think that coupled with his lack of size, that's a really big blow to the overall capture of the original intent and emotion behind the character. I think you could have changed one or the other, but the fact that they lost both, I think, got us too far away and probably resulted in some of the critical response to his overall design. Also, super fast, shout out to Cinema Makeup School for doing an excellent job of translating this cosplay of Apocalypse. This is so much better of a true translation of the character and intent, so shout out to them. Let's take a look at the Wicked Witch of the West. To me, the Wicked Witch's three biggest points of interest are that she has green skin, she wears all black, and she has pointed features in both her anatomy and her wardrobe. Now, if you want to do a custom design based off of the Wicked Witch of the West, it would be really hard to change those three things. Now, you could change them, but you'd have to do something that we're going to talk a little bit later, which is replacing it with something with the same emotion and story intent. Okay, now let's look how they translated the old Wicked Witch of the West to the new Oz Great and Powerful movie that came out in the last decade. Shout out to Howard Berger, who's a friend of Jonah and Blue Whale Studios. The makeup was pretty awesome on this. So as we look, we can see that her makeup is very much the same. They use the green, but they totally change her anatomy. But the thing they keep intact is her pointed features. And when we look past the makeup and even look at the wardrobe, they still do the same thing. She wears all black. She has pointed, aggressive features. She has a dominating presence, and I think that intent is super important. So moving out of our broad view look, let's take a look at primary forms. These are the three things I think you should consider when thinking about a primary form in a character design being translated. Think about the shapes, the silhouette, the size. Now, these all have different elements to them, so let's dig a little deeper. When talking about shapes, you really need to consider the flow. As you make things, you want to make sure that every piece flows appropriately. This has a lot to do with size as well, but we're not going to get onto that in just a second. We'll come back to that in a moment. So consider the flow and consider the shapes themselves in terms of the story and intent. Shapes are symbols, and that's an important thing to consider. You're going to hear me say that a lot. Shapes, color, silhouette, they all tell story, and you really need to become adapted to seeing them in designs and implementing them in your final product. Check out this cool resource I found on symbology and shapes. Hit the pause button, give it a look, and maybe I'll do a whole video in the future on symbology. Something not a lot of people consider when working on a character translation, a project, a cosplay, is posture, body language. This is an area where, again, kind of like considering your actor's ability to perform, these are things you have to think about. Is this thing built to be worn the way it should be to tell the story? Next up, we have size, and this goes back to our shapes. Sometimes shapes require the right size to fit the overall silhouette. You see how we went through all three things there? When you think about size, think about the story it tells. Are they big? Are they imposing? Are they small? Are they approachable? These are huge elements to our primary form. And lastly, we come on to silhouette. Silhouette is going to tell you a lot about a character pretty immediately. Just take a look at these different silhouettes I'm going to throw up. This could be the same person, but each one tells you a different story, but it's basically just a shadow. That's how massively important silhouette, shape, and size are to your forms. So as you're taking these primary forms into consideration when translating a character, really make sure that you can get the story from afar and in really simple ways. Once you have that, you've got a very strong foundation for an incredible character design to unfold down the road. That brings us to secondary forms. This is where you're going to flesh out all of the stuff that you did in your primary form. This is where I feel you really need to consider colors and textures, because they're going to play on your primary forms in ways that help accent the story you've already laid out in that section. To me, these secondary forms are one of my biggest complaints when I see other cosplayers. To me, secondary forms, especially color and texture, is where I see most cosplayers leave a lot on the table. Choosing a fabric that has depth and color and texture, things that add value to those primary forms, is going to enrich your character so much. A lot of times what separates a movie costume from a cosplay costume is literally just the choices of colors and textures and the amount of layers that you put into them. Color is so underdone. Always look for areas to create more depth in your color, layer. You can always shadow, highlight, embellish. These are things that will really bring your secondary forms to life. Okay, this is huge. I need your attention. Avoid singular colors. I don't care if the whole costume is just red. Do something to add other red tones to it, even if it's just airbrushing a little bit of a darker red just in the corners, just to make it look like it has some depth, something. Please, please, for the love of God, don't use one color. Now again, we talked about symbolism, and this is another area for both colors and textures. Symbolism is massively important here. You have to mind the mood of the colors and the textures that you're bringing into play. Do they look earthy? Do they look more natural? Does that give you a more rustic character? Are they more pristine, polished? Do they give you a more regal character? Think about those things as you take into consideration what you're going to do with those colors and textures and how they're going to affect your primary forms, making sure they work in conjunction or complement what you've already done. So now we're in tertiary forms. To me, tertiary forms is where you're basically just putting finishing touches on a character that's solid from the structure on the ground all the way up to the top. Tertiary forms, to me, in terms of these kinds of designs, are going to be things like makeup, hair, hand props, accessories, things like contact lenses or teeth. These are all things that I think about in a sort of tertiary way. Now, that being said, could you potentially have a character that's all about the makeup and hair, and then you kind of really have to go through these whole silhouette to, primary, secondary, tertiary forms for just that element? Absolutely. I'm definitely talking in a broad way today, but figure out how do these forms and their functions come into play for the character you're looking to train. Makeup choices are going to play those same kinds of levels of what kind of story, the emotion, the color palette, your hair, your teeth. How do they all come in play with what you've already established in primary and secondary form? But these are the things that you should be thinking about kind of lightly in the back of your head as you develop the character. But for the most part, most of these things are going to exist almost standalone in a way. So when it comes to planning, really focus on your primary and secondary forms before you start tackling these. It's always great to have them in the back of your head, but ultimately make sure that you don't jump ahead to these steps unless it's a character that really has these bits at the front and center of their design. If you're unsure of what might be a point of interest and what to focus on in terms of what to put this form and function in first, ask people. Ask them that question. What are the 3 things that embody this character? And then just see over, maybe ask 10 of your friends. How many people say that this one element is super important? You might be like, I didn't think that was important at all, but they're the audience. You really need to think about what do other people see and kind of get outside of your own interpretation. Once you understand the story that other people are seeing, then you can figure out how to tell a story that they're going to understand while implementing your creativity and your personal style and flair into those design choices. Now, with all that being said, let's look at a project where we had to go through all of these steps to translate a character from another medium to a finished product. Take a look at this HeMan costume that we were commissioned to make by Brothers Young for the documentary Quest of the Muscle Nerd. As you can see here, we based this design off of a Sideshow collectible, which in and of itself was a translation of HeMan from the cartoon. So in essence, we really feel like most of the legwork was done by Sideshow in terms of translating the character from the cartoon to its collectible, and all we really did was take what we thought worked and make it into a wearable costume. Of course, we were limited to some factors. We had a very, very tight budget. We had a fairly tight turnaround. So there are a lot of things that we touched on in our last video about essential planning tips, where we had to make compromises in order to make sure we could get the most impactful character out, even if it wasn't 100% accurate to the original. Okay, so let's look at HeMan in the cartoon and the Sideshow translation that we worked off of to create the cosplay.
Fabulous secret powers were revealed to me the day I held aloft my magic sword and said, "By the power of Grayskull!"
What are the 3 main points of interest that we see in the cartoon? He's incredibly masculine, he's muscular, he has very sharp, square, or chiseled features, be that his abs, his jawline. I think a good word for that would just be masculine. In terms of his outfit, which might be the next point of interest, he's wearing something that accentuates his muscles. So he's wearing a skirt with side plates that let his legs show. He's wearing an X-shaped harness that shows off his chest muscles. He's not overly covered, so that's an important piece. And lastly, I think one of the other things that I think we could probably pull out is his hair. Now, let's look at the Sideshow collectible and our eventual translation of that. We kept the long blonde hair because Could we have given him short blonde hair? Probably, but it would have been a bit of a draw. Did we need to give him the ugly He-Man bob? Absolutely not. Not necessary at all. In fact, I think it's a huge boost to the character to lose the bob. Did they keep the X-shaped harness? Yes, they did. And in fact, they made it more interesting and more embellished in terms of the almost epic nature of the character. This is an example of how they took what was originally there and added value to it instead of changing it in a way that took away or just completely got too far from the intent. And is he still muscular? Yeah, he's still a big beefcake. I mean, so ultimately all they did was translate some of the elements of his outfit into more realistic versions while keeping the intent and the heart of the character the same. Very, very successful in my opinion. All we did was basically take that and then translate it into a wearable costume, which we utilized a lot of my sort of 5 essential planning tips, which if you haven't seen it, link in the description below. So yeah, take a look. What do you think? Did Swisher do a great job? Real quick, I just want to say thank you to our entire team at Blue Whale Studios and the many hands that were a part of making this project come to fruition. I also want to thank Catherine from God Save the Queen, who provided all of the fabric and leather portions, as well as Travis Wood, who did all of the modeling recreating Sideshow's designs. Also, make sure to check out the description at the end of the video for a list of the full credits of people who worked on the project, as well as links to things like the Brothers Young's website, where you can find the Quest of the Muscle Nerd documentary, and the social media link for Jonathan Carroll, the actor/model who wore the costume. Okay, so let's recap. Tip number 1, make sure that when you're translating characters, try to pick ones with really strong visuals. Tip 2, try to break that character down into its core 3 to 5 major points of interest. These are going to be the things that draw most people's attention first. Tip 3, try to understand the intent, emotion, and symbolism behind these points of interest. Sometimes it shows up in shapes, colors, sizes, stature, you name it. Tip 4, if you're going to change the points of interest, be sure to do so in a new and creative way that helps bring the emotion and intent into the design even if you're changing elements. We want to add richness to our characters as opposed to strip them away. Tip 5, work to add layers to the original design rather than take away. So yeah, I think that's going to be it for me. I know I could talk about this for hours. It's an incredibly dense topic to dive into, and this is really just scratching the surface at some of those details. I hope they made sense. I tried to make it as succinct and efficient as possible, but if not, leave a comment down below and I'll get to it. I'm going to be posting every single Friday as of right now. If you feel like we earned it, please hit the like button, subscribe if you want to see more from us, and hit the bell notification if you want to get notified that we're posting more content. With that being said, that's it for me. I will see you in the next one.